Kara Kandel, you want to come on up? Kara Stillings-Kandel is the Director of Research and Curriculum at the Center for Better Schools, National Academy for Advanced Teacher Education. She's worked in the field of education for 15 years as a high school teacher, curriculum and large-scale assessment specialist for the Riverside Publishing Company, and research assistant professor at Boston University School of Education. Her work at BU has focused on domestic and international policies affecting educational opportunities for low-income students. She's the author of numerous articles on the charter schools nationally and also in Massachusetts, and on the ESEA. She's the editor of the book Partnering for Progress, Boston University, the Chelsea Public Schools, and also 20 Years of Urban Education Reform. She holds a BA in English Literature from Indiana University, an MA in Social Science from the University of Chicago, and an EDD from BU School of Education. Kara, we're looking forward to your remarks.
It is. I'm so bad at this kind of thing.
So let's do this.
Thank you. And a Mac person to boot.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
That's a bad thing. Come on, up there. And yours is right here?
I don't know. Let's take a look.
I think it is.
I think that must be. And can I just advance with the arrows?
You're trying to start the show?
Just right behind that.
It might be, yeah, that's probably what Abigail meant. There it is. There. Now, do I just advance using the arrows?
Yeah, that should be fine. Cheers. That's yours.
And there it is right there.
Right.
Okay.
You know what? And if we can't get it, we can't get it. No bacon.
That's good.
There we are.
Cheers.
All right. Biggest fear when presenting anything is technology. So thank you very much to Abigail. That was, for me, it's incredibly fascinating. I think that what's going on in DC, there are just so many lessons for us to learn here in Massachusetts, many of which Abigail highlighted for us. So I'd like to begin with a little admission here, and that is that I've been studying in the field of education for a while, as Jim pointed out, but it wasn't really until recently that I gave any thought whatsoever to early childhood education. And I started to give thought to early childhood education, as many of us do, when my 3-year-old was ready to go to preschool. But I should be especially ashamed because I'd spent a long time at the Boston University School of Education, which is doing incredibly innovative work in the early childhood space. And in fact, I count myself as very fortunate that my child is able to attend their early learning lab, where teachers in training work, and they're just doing such wonderful things. And one of the things that stood out to me as I watched Ava, her vocabulary expand, and I kind of approached preschool with this attitude that like, well, we're good parents, we know a lot of words. Things are going to be okay for our kids, and it's just amazing what high-quality early childhood education can do, and I'm eternally grateful for the fact that we've been able to provide that for first Ava and our 8-month-old at some point. But at any rate, when I was given the opportunity to write this paper, to look at the early childhood space, and to engage with one really high-functioning model, one really high-quality model, I jumped at the chance. Early childhood is on a lot of our minds lately, mostly because it's kind of come back into public consciousness with Obama saying, preschool for all should be a priority for us. I think that it's really important that we think about universal access to preschool, and as DC has done, and I think DC is to be lauded for the commitment that it's made and the investment that it's made, and others should be thinking about that in detail. But as Abigail highlighted, I think the message here is also proceed with caution, right? There are some risks associated. And so if you're going to do it, you need to do it really well and do it really intentionally. One of the things that we do know, and the paper goes into this a bit, but I won't spend too much time, is that federally funded programs that currently exist They do many things well. Head Start, for example, TANF, can give families access to things like social services and preventative health care, but they aren't always academically focused, right? We know that children who attend those programs, in comparison to their peers attending other programs, don't achieve at the same levels when they go on in school. And that is problematic. That's due in large part to the fact that, community-based programs that are federally funded, there are a lot of regulations that they must adhere to, but there has rarely, if ever, been a focus on outputs, on outcomes, on what they're doing to help children achieve and indeed in holding them accountable for that. So given this context, it's really, really important, we highlight this in the paper, to think about not just preschool for all, but to think about what high quality preschool for all really looks like. We have a couple of ideas, and Abigail, I think, does a wonderful job of pointing out some of the great things that DC is doing that are up here on this list. According to the National Institute for Early Education Research, there are several things that sort of help to define what high-quality preschool looks like. Degreed teachers, specialized training in early childhood, establishment of standards, small class sizes, all of the things that intuitively we, especially here in Massachusetts, as we pride ourselves on our high standards, right, would say works. But in writing this paper, we thought, these guidelines are really helpful, but more helpful would be looking at one model, and there are others out there, but one model that's doing it really well. And we know it's doing it well because in a moment I'll show you some of the outcomes, but also the Apple Tree Early Learning Centers, created by the Apple Tree Institute, have been lauded by the federal government, in fact, receiving an I3 Investing in Innovation grant for their model of early childhood education. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of an overview of that model as we go along. First of all, to sort of understand the context, the Apple Tree Institute is a nonprofit organization that has developed a comprehensive model for early childhood education called Every Child Ready. The Institute itself currently operates a charter school network with 7 campuses across Washington, D.C., serving 3- and 4-year-old children. As Abigail noted, that's sort of an exception, so they're not necessarily housed, the Apple Tree charter schools, in other schools. They serve 3- and 4-year-old children, and the vast majority of those children, as you might expect, come from underprivileged families who might not otherwise have access to tuition-based preschools, but do have access to preschool because of what DC has put in place. In recent years, Apple Tree has expanded its reach beyond its own schools and has partnered with other charter school networks, 5 to be exact, to put its model into place in some schools that are in fact, preschool to grade 5. They've also put the model in 31 public schools in the DC area. So what is the model? So Every Child Ready, in brief, and again the paper goes into this in more detail, is really, it was developed over more than a decade and it's evidence-based, really looking at what are best practices in early childhood education. It is a model that delineates standards for what to teach, delivery of a curriculum, frameworks for how to teach. So that critical piece that Abigail was mentioning about, what's different about teaching a preschooler than teaching a 5th grader? Many, many, many things, as we all know. Frameworks for how to teach. And thirdly, really importantly, mechanisms for understanding when effective teaching is taking place. So the standards that Apple Tree has created with the Every Child Ready model are aligned to the standards that children in DC, Common Core, the standards that children will be expected to meet as they progress through school. So they engaged in backward planning, basically asking the question, all right, what are children going to need to be able to know? What are they going to be able to do in kindergarten for success? The model, in addition to that, in addition to these standards and curriculum, includes a framework that really helps teachers understand this is how I should deliver this curriculum. In the context, I would add, of flexibility, right? So teachers are professionals who have the ability to say, for this child, this is what's going to work, but I know I have this toolkit to help me understand some strategies for the best delivery of this curriculum. And finally, the observation tools. Really, really critical to understand these observation tools. Principals, teacher leaders can use these tools to give, near constant feedback to teachers, saying, okay, look at what you're doing, we can tweak your practice a little bit in this way, and let's think specifically about this one child and how can we get him or her to move in the direction that he or she needs to go for success. This is really important because I think I would put to you that it stands in contrast to so much of what we do, especially in existing universally funded pre-kindergarten programs. Certainly not taking place, for example, in many Head Start centers, which is what so many states currently use to allow children who can't families who can't otherwise afford preschool to access it. But then there are a couple of other things that I think we need to know that happen on the ground. The model itself is very important, but Apple Tree's schools have some flexibility, as I mentioned, to do the things that individual teachers and school leaders know they need to do. But there are some other things that are consistent. And some of those consistencies have been enabled by the charter model, Apple Tree running a network of charter schools. So first of all of the teachers in Apple Tree's, and well, it sounds like in DC, are highly qualified. They have bachelor's degrees. They're given ongoing professional development. They're also supported in their classrooms by teacher fellows, right? So we have very small teacher-student ratios, by teacher fellows who are also degreed, and then by teaching assistants who are credentialed in early childhood education. Again, this very much sets Apple Tree and DC apart from other models that exist. As I mentioned, teachers are constantly evaluated and given constant feedback as to the effectiveness of their teaching. And the other critical piece here is that it's not just teachers getting feedback about their teaching, it's teachers getting feedback about students. So to Abigail's point about assessment, a really critical component of this model is that students are assessed. And as you pointed out, they're assessed in what Apple Tree's lead researcher would say, an ecologically valid way, right? In the context of play, play-based classrooms in Apple Tree's learning centers, embrace the idea of a play-based classroom. Usually children, well, they would probably tell me all the time, children do not realize they're being assessed. It's usually in a one-on-one context. But importantly, it takes place on a quarterly basis, which allows teachers and school leaders to really gauge where individual students are and what they need to do to adjust to make sure that those students have the foundations for learning that they're going to need to be successful in kindergarten. That data-driven instruction is really, really critical. And I think to the point, it's really, really critical if we're going to expect that students continue on in schooling through this way, in this way. What this amounts to really, with regard to Apple Tree, is, by focusing on outcomes, they've achieved really important outcomes. And this is the piece. I would refer you to the paper because there are a lot of charts and graphs in there. I myself am a kind of person that's drawn to stories a little bit more, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more of the story. But on baseline assessments, Apple Tree students, so when they're coming in, they typically score on par with their peers in under-resourced communities, which is to say that they usually enter preschool with below average scores in the domains that we would want to be aware of at the preschool level: phonological awareness, receptive and definitional vocabulary, and even early math abilities. By the end of their second year with Apple Tree, students significantly outperform their peers on all measures. They recognize 25% more letters in kindergarten. They score 20 points higher on tests of oral fluency than their non-Apple Tree peers. And Apple Tree alums score 70% higher on average on tests of oral reading in the second grade. So I would put to you that this is evidence not only that Apple Tree is having an impact on students while they're at Apple Tree, but it's also showing the value that the model is adding that it builds over time, right? They have longitudinal data that say students are continuing to progress once they leave us, closing that achievement gap, in fact, before it begins. And I think that the next piece of anecdotal data, to me, is incredibly powerful. So as Abigail highlighted, DC is making great gains, but it has a long way to go. And the achievement gap there looms larger than it does in many places. By the time they leave elementary school, 22% of DC students, the majority of whom are minority and low income, will be identified for special education services. And in many instances, this identification is not necessarily indicative of a diagnosed learning disability or a medical issue, but it becomes necessary children have trouble accessing mainstream classrooms when they don't have the foundational skills necessary for success. And so they need special education services to help them access that. Of the Apple Tree graduates that have gone on to DC public elementary schools, and they have a few years of data on this so far, No student has to date been identified for special education services in kindergarten or elementary school, nor have any Apple Tree students been retained a grade. I think that's pretty powerful evidence that the gap can be closed if we focus it here. It might also explain why, although Apple Tree's mission has always been to serve those who wouldn't otherwise have access, they're sort of in hot demand right now, and some of their campuses are noting a real increase in subscription and applications to their school, especially among middle and upper income parents. So it's kind of a nice problem for Apple Tree to have. They're saying, well, this isn't the demographic we intended to serve. As a charter school, we can't discriminate as to whom we accept, but I think it shows that folks who could otherwise afford an expensive preschool education are saying, hey, this works. Right? We want this for our kid, so for our children, and I think that's a really important takeaway here. So I'd like to conclude by thinking just a little bit about why we should care about this here in Massachusetts. I think the first reason we should care is that if we intend to get serious about using early childhood education as a method to heading off the achievement gap before it starts, we need to have a clear understanding of what high-quality early childhood education really looks like. And Apple Tree presents one model that can inform the conversation. There are also some that we have right here in Massachusetts that we can, of course, look to. But I encourage you to read the paper and consider this model as one that's also worthy of our attention. A couple aspects of the model at which we need to look closely, and one in particular is its emphasis on outcomes rather than inputs. We've learned a lot in Massachusetts in the past 20 years. We've learned that a focus on outcomes really does help prepare more students for college and career, and we need to understand how to do this in the preschool context. It's going to be different doing this in the preschool context, and we need to have a very good understanding about that. We also need to consider that the right delivery system is imperative. Apple Tree had the ability to innovate, to experiment, to constantly refine its curriculum. It also, in its schools, has the ability, more flexibility to hire and fire the teachers that it wants, right? So in many ways, it seems that the charter delivery system has worked really well for the Apple Tree Early Learning Centers. They could also make really important decisions related to budget, for example. Here in Massachusetts, if we would open up more charter school seats, I would argue, we have a flourishing charter sector. We would be really well equipped to use that charter sector to more effectively deliver early childhood education services to all of our students, to truly make preschool universally available. And I would point out that it's no accident that some of our highest performing charter schools, I'm on the board of City on a Hill, and we are the lone remaining charter high school in Boston. The only remaining charter high school, because everybody else has figured out, and we figured it out too, but we remain committed to high school, that they need to expand down to catch kids earlier if they're really going to ward off the achievement gap. Doing it on the back end, some kids need it, and we should not fail those children, but waiting until children are in high school to play catch up, to get them college and career ready, just isn't enough. So our charter high schools are saying, we need to add a middle school. Wait, we need an elementary school. And I think now the time has come to say, we really need charter preschools. So I hope that you will read and enjoy the paper. There's a lot more data in there. I think that the story of Jack's story of founding Apple Tree and the Institute, his own story being a leader of 2 charter high schools and realizing much of what I just said, that we can't do it on the back end, we really need to make a commitment to preschool, is in there and really worth a read. But most of all, I want to thank you for just taking the time to be here, because I think this is a critical topic, and I thank Pioneer too for highlighting it.